Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Dead town theory. I recently came across a YouTube video discussing a theory about dead towns. It piqued my interest as a few weeks ago, on a random road trip, I came across a really strange situation in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. I stopped to get gas just south of Sioux Falls on Interstate 29. I was headed for the Black Hills, but wanted to do some camping on the Missouri River. Google Maps routed me through some back roads. I didn't mind. I wasn't in any hurry to get anywhere, and I thought it'd be interesting to see the South Dakota countryside. My first indication there was something strange was the fact that most of the route was almost a straight line, but on the county highway I kept running into road closed ahead signed, so I'd have to zigzag miles out of my way to get back on the correct heading. In my experience, Google Maps is typically aware of road closures, but not one of the several I encountered were ever marked. The deeper I drove into the interior, the more desolate it became. The fewer vehicles I would see pass me by. There were farms everywhere, and they all seemed to be maintained, but almost all the farmhouses looked to be abandoned. Not only abandoned, but dilapidated and falling apart, like several decades of neglect falling apart. I currently reside in Iowa and drive all over the state, so I'm pretty familiar with Midwest farming. I just have never experienced seeing anything like this before. I ended up going through a county seat town called Parker, South Dakota. The first indication things are off, as I turn into the town on the 44, I'm greeted with another large, road closed ahead sign. I really wish I stopped to take pictures. As I continue down west through the town, about a third of the streets all have road closed signs. There are some signs of construction, but most of the streets are closed for no reason as far as I could tell. I ended up driving about 2 miles west outside of town before the road is completely closed off by barricades. There is no sign of construction, and I cannot, for the life of me, see what is causing these constant road closures. I double back and try to figure out how to get around this menace of road closures. Google Maps is of no use. It keeps trying to put me back on the same route. As I make my way through the tow, I continue to see more and more road closures. At this point, I see absolutely no one. No vehicles, no humans, no animals, maybe a bird here or there. I finally see a guy driving slowly near the courthouse with Colorado tags, looking equally as confused as me. I double back more and zigzag my way onto a dirt road that takes me into some Twilight Zone area. I eventually make my way back onto the 44 well past the road closures. I drive for 45 minutes without passing another vehicle. Every farmhouse on that route was completely in shambles and abandoned. Every 5 or 10 miles I'd pass another road closure sign, but this time, the sign was on the opposite side of the road. Pick related of the backtracking saved on my maps. OP here. Also, on a dirt road marked in pick related, there was a farmhouse that reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Probably had at least 100 abandoned cars on the property, all scattered around with rusted out farm equipment. Got really spooked driving past it, thinking if I get a flat or breakdown near there I'd be seriously fucked. But yeah, I think it's prime for exploration. I sure the hell won't be going back though.
I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that post-2008 economics have gutted most rural towns, and reduced property and sales tax revenue means that a lot of roads are essentially no longer maintained. A lot of real estate and agricultural companies have gone in and bought up a lot of farm property and have essentially sat on them, which has kept home prices in the area relatively high, pricing out locals who would like to own and develop the property. And with interest rates the way they are right now, most of those properties will remain empty until they drop interest rates to near zero again. One way you could test this theory is to pull up Zillow or Trulia or something and look to see if any homes in the area have sold recently or are for sale, and from there you can see which lenders own the properties. And my theory is that these towns have been abandoned long ago, and the government is maintaining them to not make it look like the country is failing and these towns died out.
Usually some of the first things to go are schools, since they require a certain amount of attendance and are typically funded by property tax revenue. So if you notice a lot of empty or closed schools in those towns, then that would indicate that it probably is just getting gutted by economics and essentially a ghost town. Things like empty factories, farms, and schools would be your biggest tell in this situation.
Fuck dead towns. WTF happened to dead neighborhoods? Those threads sure did come and go quick. TLDR. Some anons claim that there's houses in neighborhoods that are completely empty 24/7, despite having cars and shit in the driveway. Even going as far as entering these houses and showing vids for a while.
It's unfortunately not even the neighborhoods in the backwater towns, etc. It's even in major cities, including yours. Half of these cities are completely empty, yet the lights are still on. Take a day or two off from work during the weekday and just go wandering into your closest city and just start looking into places from the street. Most are devoid of any human life, but the lights are still on. Now ask yourself, this is the middle of the day. Aren't these buildings supposed to have some semblance of life? Then try at night and see it's still empty, even where people should be then. There was a noticeable mark of population drop in the last few years. Maybe it just allowed for what was hidden to slip through the cracks from decades ago. I've seen a few ghost towns where they should be active, just like OP is saying.
The population of America is falsely inflated by an unknown magnitude. I'm talking for every 10 to 1,000 people in a population, there is actually only one person. This is also why there seems to be illegals everywhere, even though the numbers say they should just be a small fraction of our population. Cities aren't even full of people. I've been all around cities in America and they're dead as hell. There might be like 5 spots that are actually hopping on a Saturday night even in cities that are huge. In smaller cities there is sometimes maybe 1 spot. I've been to cities where everyone says, oh, go to that bar. It's the hottest place in town. And it's like 12 to 25 people in there the whole night. I've lived on multiple dead-end streets, funnily enough. 2 times my house was the first on the street at the entrance, so every car coming and going would pass me. There were 58 houses in that neighborhood, and I'd stay up through the morning and watch the cars leave for work in the morning. I would see 4 or 5 cars leave, the same ones every morning. I knew one family, with kids, and 2 of the cars were there. It's screwed up to think about because back then I didn't even notice it. But while riding my bike one time, the lady with the kids asked me, "Do you notice how empty it is here?" And I kinda didn't know WTF she was talking about because there were cars in every driveway. It's actually giving me chills because since they lived in the middle of the neighborhood and not the edge, I can only imagine the amount of noticing they did compared to me. Like I really only saw the cars and traffic as a sign, but I bet they must have really noticed how dead and quiet it was, or knocked on neighbors' doors as normies do.
Yeah, for sure some entity, BlackRock, owns empty real estate to further control the market.
It's really weird. I live on a one-way street with about 100 houses and leave for work around 7:20 to arrive at work around 7:50. But when I drive to work, even if I leave much earlier, I am the only one driving out of the street. It is incredibly rare to see another car driving on the same road. Almost never happens.
I knock on doors with the local church. The last few weeks I and my partner might knock on 40 houses. Literally only 3 or so people that come to the door. The houses look decorated on the outside, but it's radio silence.
Who keeps the newspapers or bills from piling up? In my country, when someone leaves the house for a few weeks, they ask a trusted neighbor to pick up all the mail left at the door for them, because if papers pile up, thieves know the home is alone and will try to sneak in to rob. Maybe they don't use paper bills there. Even so, who keeps the plants tidy, keeps out all pests and ant, termites or spiders, etc.?
Newspapers haven't been popular in 20 years, Anon, and mail can simply not be delivered. It takes nothing to let the local USPS know not to deliver to an address, and if the local USPS is abandoned or fake too, then there's no one to deliver in the first place. To your second point, nature doesn't always reclaim. But even if it does, sending a crew out every couple of weeks is easy. Stagger the crews, and they won't even question why they're not seeing anyone.
If they can lie about the true population of a country, makes you wonder what else about your reality that you take for granted is actually completely false.
Yeah, I didn't read this post before I posted, but I literally just said the same fucking thing about cities. The population numbers have been inflated, and the decline in demographics because of births is much greater than we are told, plus the plague dropped the population even further. You can also do some crazy noticing with Tinder and other apps. I know everyone in my area. I'm friends with people from all the towns around me, and we look at Tinder and see thousands and thousands of profiles of people who live in our towns, and we've never met or seen any of them. I mean, we know these people can't be real. They're not people who moved here. They don't ever show up at bars, restaurants, gyms, or anywhere that people would go. They also match at a rate much less frequent than real girls, and all their photos have the same style to them. I actually know one girl who did move here, and comparing her profile to these other ones is like night and day to these other ones. And I'm not talking about bait accounts to get people to subscribe to OnlyFans or to trick people into keeping using the app, because we see those too, and they're easy to spot. We also match with these girls sometimes, and the conversation always goes the same. One of us exchanges messages with them, get along pretty well, and then they just stop responding. And the screwed up thing is, it's never on a message that you'd think. It's always like halfway in the middle of something mundane. We're also not like autistic or ugly or socially inept or anything. We all have had multiple GFS and high-paying jobs and good profiles, to the point that it's obviously not an attraction thing or like we are female repellent. To expound on that, we know all the other guys and groups of guys around us too, and none of them are dating these thousands of girls that apparently exist either.
I don't know. That sounds like me. I don't go out much anymore since the plague, mainly for the cost, but also because I've become less consumerist and no longer drink or have a restricted diet for optimal nutrition. I moved to where I lived before the plague and didn't get to know many people before that. Social anxiety from the plague is now stopping me from going out and meeting people. I'm severely socially inept, so I stop replying to conversations on the apps. It's mainly because I don't know what to say, or I forget to reply and see the message a few days later and lack the desire to be the one leading the conversation. Most of what you've noticed is just a shift in society to a more insular, screen-driven culture where no one spends much time outside.
Lol, shit like this is why I have thought about just finding a nice house and squatting. I mean, if this is real, why shouldn't I? Free house, fuck you, Chinese developer.
That is why squatters' rights is a thing. Our forefathers knew if someone can sit there and live there for a long time, they should have a right to it. Now Florida and other places are banning squatting and marketing the push to do so as a victory against squatters stealing people's houses, and we got all the viral videos we needed to have the illusion of support from people look natural. My theory is Florida is actually their planned future police state stronghold for the rich when things go to shit. It will be like America is now, but more strict and locked down. It'd be really easy to put a wall of forces at the top of the panhandle and seal most of Florida off from the rest of the country. I see them preparing for this in a lot of ways. Huge, thick camera poles every 2 miles on the highways, police stations in small towns getting fleets and fleets of crazy vehicles, and parking them in the back of the station and never using them, the laws being passed. I don't know if that means it will be a bad place to be. It might be spared from a worse fate, or it could be hell on earth, hard to tell yet.
Can agree. From what I can tell, being a cop in Florida is the bee's knees compared to the rest of the country. Even Texas and Cali are worse.
The farm thing reminds me. A few years back when I was still in high school one summer, said I attended a conservation program where I went up with a crew to do various ecological projects on public land. The last place the crew stayed, we camped the whole time, was an old abandoned farm. We set up in the field, but I guess it was fish, and game owned the farm itself was largely run down an old, seemingly unused farmhouse, a barn with a bunch of tools and shit that hadn't been touched in at least a decade, and a more modern tractor shed. I saw only one fish and game truck the whole time I was there and picked up a sign or something. Although all of this seems fairly mundane, the whole place felt off. Just something about the state it was in. It's a piece of government property, likely reposed or the estate of someone with no children. But it's just in disrepair. It's like frozen in time, just deeply uncanny.
I live in a borough outside Pittsburgh.
There is a store on a road off a main road. It has a huge white canvas banner, about maybe 2.5 by 5 foot, that says open. After 3 years, it's never been open. Sometimes, maybe once a month, a shitty old white van parks there. I've asked around. Locals say it used to be a grocery store. There are some lights that are always on. Next to it across the street is a bar. It has the signs and everything. Inside it looks like a bar. I have seen someone in there. It's never open. Also, in 3 years, it's never functioned as an actual bar. You would think 3 years is a long time to be holding empty commercial real estate, but oh well. Also, no for sale sign. Pretty sure wasn't listed on Zillow. Also, there's a bunch of huge churches. I work in one. During Sundays, they are pretty much empty. I worked for a medium-sized landlord who inherited all his properties, and he owns a closed gas station where he stores all his many things, which he pretty much doesn't even use. He is almost disabled as far as his workmanship. I don't know how he gets money because he is not productive at all, which is why I can't work with him. He just wastes my time going nowhere. Also, the main commercial avenue has mostly closed stores for at least 5 years. They have stuff in the windows, looking like stores that never open. One recently opened as a Mexican restaurant, which is cool because I love Mexican food. I wonder why they don't just rent it out. How the fuck you got entire blocks of empty stores for 5 years? The resident homes, on the other hand, are all occupied, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, this is something I started to notice fully in late 2021. Before I had an inkling something was up with the population, but that was it. In 2021, though, I don't know what the hell happened. I just suddenly began to feel like I was in a ghost town. Even the neighbor that was greeting us a lot around then stopped coming out a lot. The closest feeling I can compare it to is being in an empty city Gmod map. Now the houses around me look abandoned and not really active as much. The whole world is giving off this vibe. All I know is the plandemic really brought it to light. The only good reason I can think of that explains this is us being in some kind of false world. Either a dream, illusion, or simulation. This is the vibes I am catching, though, at least. Do any of you Anons and OP agree on this being the cause for this phenomenon?
I noticed this back around 2010-ish. I used to ride Greyhound buses between Northern California and North Carolina. It's a 5-day zigzag trip through empty cities and empty terminals, with large groups of people who will all enter at once, filling up the bus and never making a sound. As you ride the bus through a city, you can look through the windows of large buildings and see just empty floors and empty floors, thousands of huge empty offices, but someone pays to maintain the whole system. Yeah, I would chalk something like this up to just a government conspiracy, except that I've also had simulation-type experiences. Huge government conspiracies on this level definitely exist, but the world is a simulation type of things are also true. If anyone is in doubt of the huge government conspiracy thing, they can just ride a Greyhound for 5 days across the US and 5 days back. I guarantee 100% you will come out a conspiracy nutjob. They don't even really try to hide how weird shit is, because they know no one will believe you. I have no idea how to prove the weird simulation stuff, though. That shit seems to happen randomly and seems like some kind of glitch.
Euro here. Population numbers are definitely inaccurate, but I think the empty neighborhood/town phenomenon is specifically American. I'm thinking partly due to BlackRock buying out property. They often buy whole neighborhoods and blocks, essentially hoarding housing to artificially inflate prices. Another factor is boomers often owning more than one property and keeping it just to go there for vacation or something. I can tell you Anons from experience, living and traveling all over Europe, there is definitely way less of the empty town/neighborhood phenomena here. Throughout my life, I lived both in cities and suburbs, even the countryside. When you go for a walk in any neighborhood, you'll see mothers with strollers, teens and elderly people any time of day. Every suburb has people gardening and taking walks, biking, almost every evening. I like to go on long walks and recently started to pay special attention to how many people I see. Whenever I walk around the suburbs, there are some places that I know have been recently built, put on the market, that are empty, but almost all houses have kids playing outside, people grilling in the summer, cars that come and go, etc. If you go to the countryside, you can be sure all houses are lived in because everybody knows someone who knows who lives in any house. Cities are extremely lively at night, with bars packed to the brim to the point where if you go to one of the more popular places, you won't be able to secure a table past 7 p.m. It is possible empty towns and neighborhoods do exist, and I just haven't encountered them. This would make a lot of sense because investors in Europe definitely try to inflate home prices by creating false shortages too. But considering how much I travel around, I can confidently say there's definitely not many of them, since I would have encountered some by now if the phenomenon was common here. With the BlackRock thing, I was of course mostly referring to the empty neighborhoods. I can't see a rural town in the middle of nowhere being a good investment or even help to inflate housing prices much. For those places, I see no good explanation, except maybe some had an incident like water or soil pollution happen to them and people were moved, but are still coming over every once in a while to keep the houses in good condition while they wait for pollution to go down and to move in again. That's definitely a small percentage of these towns though, and reporting on such incidents would probably be easily searchable. It would also in no way explain cars in the driveway and lights on. I read some pretty compelling, if true, accounts of military towns which are made as a front for training soldiers in these specific conditions. It's an interesting theory, and there definitely are places like these, as you can find what looks like towns on Google Maps with zero searchable info about their name or population. I don't think the government would create Potiomkin villages just to make it look like the population is higher than in reality. Most people are too lazy to question the official numbers regardless of how many people they see in their day-to-day, and for the people who are already suspicious, an empty town is just further proof. Something is not adding up with the official narrative. There has to be some use for them other than just lying about the population.
Russia definitely has the same thing as America. Never been there, but I do speak Russian and visit Tucson to brush up on my skills. There are a ton of threads on empty towns and blocks of flats, with users even doing tests to prove they have maybe 2 neighbors in their entire building. Some anons even go further and argue that many people and especially cars they see are holograms and NPCs. Supposedly there's a ton of traffic in some smaller towns during work hours, when most residents would be at work, especially considering most of them work out of town, and the roads aren't any major roads where traffic from outside of town would happen much. There's also reports of people encountering the same people in the same spots doing the exact same thing at random days and times of day as if they were just there all day every day.
I believe that the human population, at least in first world countries, is vastly overestimated. The closest city to me has 1.3 million people living in it, apparently, yet logistically it makes zero sense. Firstly, the roads would be 100% gridlocked for weeks straight. Then there's also the question of how those 1.3 million people would even live. There's like 5 hospitals with around 100 beds each. I'm being generous. So presumably at any given time, there are less than 500 people seriously ill injured out of the 1.3 million. I've brought this up to friends and they always say something along the lines of, "Oh well, you wouldn't believe the damn traffic," as a sort of half joke. But I don't think they understand that if there were really 1.3 million people, the traffic would be intolerable to the point that nobody would drive at all. Then outside of the city, it feels like I'm from fucking I Am Legend.
But you do know that people have different schedules. Then there is kids and teenagers that never drive. Then there are bikers. Then there are people who go by public transportation. Then there are people working from home almost all the time since the plague. Then there are elderly not leaving the house of driving anymore, stay-at-home wives, etc. I don't know the real statistics about hospitalized folks, but I would assume that most are not severely injured and stay in hospital for prolonged times occupying beds. They just leave after ambulant treatment.
That is true that only a fraction of people would be driving at any one time, but the population estimates still just seem very sinister and weird the more you think of your real-life experiences, at least in my case. Similar to other anons in this thread, I've gone to popular venues on a Saturday and seen like 20 people, or gone to the main shopping center right in the middle of the city, and there's maybe a total of 200 people at peak shopping time during the weekend. Another weird thing I experienced, during the plaque, I went to a walk-in clinic thing for a moderate problem, and despite the news saying healthcare was collapsing due to massive demand, there was literally one other person in this fairly large clinic aside from me, that being the receptionist. There were no doctors working at the time, so she had to call in someone who took 15 minutes to drive there and help me. This one really weirded me out. Like, am I supposed to believe that nobody else had a health problem in the surrounding towns, and that doctors don't work there? This was at noon during a workday BTW.
I'm not trying to debunk your theory, I actually find it really interesting. But as a European, I have to agree with the other Euro. I never encountered anything like this before, but to be fair, the sheer size of the United States is immense. You guys have national parks that are larger than the county I live in. Then there is all the missing people in rural areas. It's indeed possible that the population is less than publicly stated. I don't know why, maybe because the picture of the world power has to be kept alive. One of the most interesting threads I read on /x/since a while.
Argentine here. I was thinking the exact same thing. I traveled quite a bit down here and never encountered any dead or ghost town. There's always people. There's traffic in bigger places, open shops, people drinking coffee in little coffee shops, gas stations with several employees. We don't pump our own gas here, etc. In smaller places, there's the siesta time, between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. approximately, where people are all sleeping and shops are closed. But the rest of the day, I've always seen people, cars, children, stray dogs. Real estate down here is more about construction still. You know, think big skyscrapers, malls, apartment complexes, etc. Most family houses are owned by the actual people who live in them. Argentina is big though, so the "oh, but European countries are small" thing doesn't apply here. Yet I've never experienced the whole ghost town stuff. Seems like a very American concept.
I have had these experiences for a while, but most prominently when I was little. I'd go outside to find creatures, turning over rocks, etc., and there would be days where there was literally just nothing. No birds chirping, no insects hiding under rocks, nothing. The whole world felt like it was still and artificial, this suffocating feeling in the air also. Sometimes the world just works differently when you're alone versus when with a larger group of people. I'm not proposing that reality is a simulation, but that things aren't exactly like what they say. There is a whole extra layer to our reality than we're being told. When I go places, people immediately show up about the same time. When I want to be left alone, people flock to my location. Maybe humans or living things have a sort of subconscious harmony. I don't know.
The UK has a minimum of 250,000 empty houses, but we always need to build more. There's whole areas where everything is boarded up, and surprisingly a few people do live in these places. My grandparents' road, I think at least half the homes are maintained, but people don't live in them, just brought for investment purposes, and that's an affluent area. Around my way 20 years ago, there was a load of abandoned homes, but nearly all of them have been knocked down and filled up with immigrants to create scarcity. Money has to then go into welfare and jobs in these areas, while other parts of the country receive very little investment and slowly rot. I'm south of London. The population for a tiny area overall is 15,000 within a few square miles. There's one pub 2 minutes from the train station, and last night there was about 10 people. It's not that bad of a place, at the end of the night chatting to the owner about it. This place was built easily for 50 or more. I find it bizarre that so little people are not going out when the weather is okay, and it's hot for a nation of drinkers.
City friend OP visits a small town for the first time. Economy's fucked. Small towns are mostly home to old people and people who commute a long way to work and back. Roadwork and closures are less likely to be reported to shit like Google for the same reason Google Street View rarely ever does any more than the main road, and doesn't bother updating Street View for upwards of a decade. People are encouraged and forced to fuck off to cities for diplomas and work lest they choose to do low-paying farm work or retail work at local general stores, bars, etc. These days, same people tend to have older vehicles because they still work, aren't wealthy and haven't incentive to buy new shit. A lot of houses are left vacant for the prior reasons, and the fact that even they are considered worth insane amounts of money. Hell, A foreclosed actual dump that's falling apart in my town is listed for sale just shy of $100,000. A lot of houses are run down and poor looking for the same reasons. Plus, there aren't dystopian HOAs with suspicious amounts of legal power fining people for waiting an hour too long to mow the fucking lawn.
Brazilian here. I definitely have never seen this before unless it's a big holiday and people went to the beach. I've lived in 7 towns already, both large and small. The more I read about this, the more it seems to be a problem exclusive to the U.S.
Anyone who grew up in an American suburb knows the creepy feeling of seeing all these houses that are apparently owned, but never seeing anyone enter or exit them. When I was about 12, me and my friends broke into one because we thought it was haunted, but apparently it was just owned by someone's relative who died, and they wanted to keep the property. I can't say I believe the dead neighborhood theory, but I definitely remember bad vibes coming from certain houses in certain parts of the neighborhood as a kid. Like all of us, kids agreed not to play in the back of the neighborhood because we all sensed there was something creepy or bad about it. And that one house everyone believed was owned by a pedo, just really bad vibes.
Honestly, I think this is a remnant of the Cold War. Both America and Russia had to keep up the appearance of their system country being superior, like with the space race. So like that you have to fake economic growth. But there's a limit to how much you can claim it's due to an increase in productivity before people start questioning the narrative. So just fake your population numbers as well. A bunch of Western economists, and I use quotation marks because I think economist is entitled as credible as bone shaman, maybe even less, quite often claim China has fudged their population figures, and in reality their population is much lower. It's obvious that America is capable and most likely has done the same.
So far, this is the best thread about the topic at hand that I have come across. I have commented on a few of these and have been studying this phenomenon for about 20 years. While I think some aspects of the empty town's neighborhood's mystery can be explained by non-metaphysical factors, there is a paranormal aspect to this in that most people are inexplicably not aware of what is happening around them. The fact is that up until the 1970s, Americans were truly more self-sufficient and willingly spread themselves throughout the continent far and wide. Just look at Google Maps and check out any random towns you see. Many will only have populations of about 1,000. Unless you are willing to live without many of the conveniences afforded to metropolitan life, you're not going to want to live in these little towns. The real question is, how could so much of the country be settled and built up by supposedly a much smaller population, only for it to be abandoned in less than 60 years? That doesn't make sense when most of these places preceded industrialization, but were somehow unable to survive the effects of it. As for why everything these days seems empty, cities, towns, neighborhoods, shopping centers, parks, etc., this is where we get into /x/territory. As some anons posted here, places like Seattle, Milwaukee, Portland, etc. don't have this problem. These places look and feel full. But there are many, many other places that have witnessed a dramatic shift just in the last 10 to 15 years. Are people moving away? Are they not being replaced by natural reproduction? Are people migrating in undocumented ways? Are people not going outside anymore? Is this just the boomers dying off? Whatever this is, we better start getting a grip on it, because there are unseen opportunities developing for the people willing to put in the work. And this might be the reason that this topic gets derailed every time it is brought up. The last thing I will add is that you have the ability to turn this around to an extent. Go out and start talking to people. Be friendly with people that appear to share your values. Try to lead conversations into directions where the idea of empty towns can be mentioned. Gather intel. Think of it this way. If we really are in some sort of reset and people have disappeared or otherwise, enormous regions of the country are now like 4chan was in 2008. You should be able to spot unique individuals such as those reading this much easier than if there were 1,000s of NPCs running around. They have shit up 4chan to the point the world has become 4chan. Most don't know it yet. Go out and explore and start looking for your brothers.
The dead internet is certainly slowly becoming true. On X, formerly Twitter for example, there is a 50-50 chance at this point that you're talking to some kind of LLM AI model, and sometimes you only notice it after a handful of posts or when they immediately bug out. It's not really a problem on boards like /x/yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're getting there in 10 years. People have been calling each other bots on 4chan and other websites for ages, but since ChatGPT, that shit is actually possible and happening.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.